Thank you for coming today. We're excited to have Dr. Ken Bagstad here. And he is a research economist at the USGS Geosciences and Environmental Change Science Center. He has a PhD in natural resources from the University of Vermont, a master's in plant biology from Arizona State University, and a BA in botany and environmental sciences from Ohio Wesleyan University. And so in a nutshell, I had fun reading through your bio and your sites and everything, but in a nutshell, Ken uses GIS and modeling to quantify, map, and value ecosystem service flows across the US. So he is the USGS lead for the US Natural Capital Accounting Program and has worked with the World Bank and UN on this, which I'm sure we'll hear more about. He has also co-led the development of content for the Artificial Intelligence for Environmental and Sustainability Project, or the ARES project, which has developed software tools to deliver more timely and accurate information for environmental decision-making. And through this project, Ken has a strong interest in the use of artificial intelligence to make scientific data and models interoperable and reusable by both people and computers. With that, I'm happy to introduce Dr. Ken Bagstad here for his talk titled Using Big Data to Measure Nature's Benefits to the Economy Through Natural Capital Accounting. Thanks, Ken.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And I wish I was there in person, but thank you anyway for the opportunity to speak virtually today. So I'm going to try to keep my talk to no more than about a half hour, so we have plenty of time for questions and discussions. So I'll just start us out by pointing out something that's probably obvious to ecologists and natural scientists in the room, which is that nature underpins all economic activity. And that includes things we put a dollar value on, like timber and raw materials and outdoor recreation, and things that we don't put a dollar value on, such as spiritual, therapeutic, and health benefits. So nature really is at the core of all human activity. Our economy is nested within the environment. So a lot of the work I do is about trying to measure that and to make that more explicit. And one of the really exciting things of the last few years has been work under the Biden administration to properly account for nature in a variety of different initiatives. I'm going to be speaking today about this one on the right, which is the administration's Natural Capital Accounting Initiative. There's also been work on nature-based solutions, a national nature assessment, and an initiative called the America the Beautiful, which is the U.S. effort toward 30 by 30, conserving 30% of America's lands and waters by the year 2030. So I'll focus on this, but there are connections between all of these initiatives, as you would expect. So what is natural capital accounting? I'll spend a moment talking about that. Accounting in general means that we have a structured set of rules to record information about the environment and natural resources. Generally, we look back in time, but there are abilities increasingly to use this information for forecasting. We do include physical and monetary units. We look at a wide range of natural resources, as mentioned here, stocks and flows of those, and can compare trends and trade-offs across resources. And really importantly, these are compatible with economic accounts, and I'll spend a bit more time talking about that. There are international standards and a national guidance that we follow, but there's also some flexibility if someone's accounting for resources in their local ecosystem to be a little creative and incorporate data sets and things that matter to local managers. So why economic accounts? Why am I starting there? I would argue that this is really the heavyweight of government statistics, and GDP is the thing that most people are going to be familiar with. But you hear about this all the time. It's produced in a way that's trusted and that's comparable over time across industries and geographies. And you hear, again, politicians, the media, public discourse, what's the effect of a new policy going to be on GDP, employment, and trade? What you don't hear is what are the effects of that policy going to be on ecosystem services, water security, other aspects that really matter increasingly in a world of rapid climate and environmental change. And the problem there is that our economic accounts have a known blind spot here. And the architects of these, who were working from the 30s to the 50s, knew about this. So this is not new information. But economic accounts are really good at measuring the contributions of labor and physical capital to generating economic activity, but they don't do that for natural resources. So what they can't do is look at the costs of depletion and damage to the environment and non-renewable resources, or the benefits of protecting, restoring, and conserving natural resources. So, with all that in mind, there is an international standard, as I mentioned, to for both economic accounting and environmental economic accounting, developed by the UN and bought into by the statistical agencies of the world. And this is important because we need to be able to compare our numbers to those of other countries and know that we're using the same methods and concepts, and that the numbers are trustworthy and transparent. So, with the knowledge that these national economic accounts are incomplete, over the last 20 or so years, the world has been working really hard on developing a set of environmental economic accounts, something called the System for Environmental Economic Accounting, again, that will let us measure natural resources in a comparable way. What's really interesting is that if you look at the example of natural resource of water resources, and you look at how that's treated in our economic accounting system, there are economic entities like a water bottler or a beverage manufacturer or a water treatment industry that will take water out of the environment and they'll sell it to economic units, which includes households. And that's the entire story under our economic accounts, which the physical scientists and ecologists in the room know, well, of course, that water has to come from somewhere. So the central framework to the environmental economic accounts takes us back a step and says, well, of course, the water comes from somewhere. It comes from a river, a lake, a reservoir, groundwater, and we need to be able to know the sustainability of that use. Is that resource improving or declining over time? Is its quality and quantity what it needs to be to maintain that use into the future? So we're able to track with this SIA central framework back a step to the water resources. But again, you might be saying, well, that's really not the full picture, because if we cut down all the forests in a watershed, we're going to have problems with our water quality and quantity. And so we really need to take this even a step back further and know that there are what are called intermediate ecosystem services that are regulating flows of water, and those need to be tracked as well. And this on the bottom gives us a much more complete and full picture of the connections between environment and economy, and we can track all of these transitions and understand where they're at risk. So these accounts are being produced in 92 countries is the latest number. This was from a survey that's a year or two old. So at the time, the US wasn't formally producing these accounts, but we've begun doing that. And I'll talk more about that in a few moments. I was fortunate to be part of a group that I helped establish in 2016, and we got some funding from a variety of sources. We saw it was mentioned in my bio that I worked with the World Bank, and so by the middle of the last decade, natural capital accounting was starting to get more common around the world. We still didn't do it in the U.S., but I had the good fortune to spend a year working with the World Bank on implementing SIA accounting in the global South, and saw that this probably would eventually come to the US. So we got funding and we assembled a working group to develop a set of pilot accounts to build the relationships between the agencies that would need to produce them, and to understand where the gaps and the challenges to doing so would be. And so we developed a set of land, water, and ecosystem accounts. We produced a special issue in the journal Ecosystem Services, and we were able to build things like this. This is for a 10-state region in the southeastern U.S. And what this is an accounting table on the right that's showing us for a variety of ecosystem services. First off, how are they changing over time? So time is explicitly included here. And also not just, well, we know these ecosystems are produced, or these services are produced by ecosystems, but which ecosystems are they produced by? And then are those ecosystems stable, improving, declining over time? So it gives us a really comprehensive view. One of the things that's nice is we can take that table and turn it into an interactive dashboard. This is some work that some colleagues at Duke have done that lets us select a state and to look through the natural capital accounting data for each state, look at how things are changing. And so it's interactive. The same team is building some Tableau dashboards to help with visualization as well. So there's a lot of work to use this in decision making. And I work for the USGS, which is a part of the US Department of the Interior. We wanted to say, well, what would this mean for the Department of Interior to apply natural capital candidates lands? And in this case, we looked in North Carolina, where there's not a lot of Department of the Interior land. If we were looking in Colorado or the West, it would be a lot more because we have BLM land and a lot of big national parks and other public lands. But even with just 2% of the lands managed by DOI, we can see that these ecosystems are really disproportionately important for providing coastal protection and blue carbon storage by coastal ecosystems. And that's not surprising when we look at this map here on the left that shows individual DOI units and the ecosystem services that they supply. And we see that there are two national seashores and a bunch of coastal wildlife refuges along the Atlantic coast of North Carolina. We can also take those accounts and go even a step further and try to distill individual indicators. So we're moving from disorganized and disaggregated information to structured information within the accounts to maps and other visuals to storylines about what's changing and why. So we can look at, for instance, how's carbon storage changing in the Great Smoky Mountains? What is the value of recreational birding supplied by DOI lands and which ecosystems are disproportionately important? And how do DOI lands provide water filtration before they reach waterways? And sort of where are those areas we need to highlight? And so we can distill that information, hopefully, into a message that matters for land and natural resource managers. We also developed a set of urban ecosystem accounts for over 700 US cities, looking at energy savings from trees in cities, looking at the value of trees for catching and infiltrating runoff. And again, we can split this out by which ecosystems are providing the value, but also who's benefiting. So, households and specific industries who benefit. And that lets us get really precisely at again, how the services are supplied by ecosystems, how they benefit specific groups of people. And that's nice because we can look at things like equity, which the administration has placed a really high emphasis on. Look at examples of where there are urban national wildlife refuges, like this example from near Brownsville, Texas, where we have an urban wildlife refuge providing value to several cities in the region and asking who benefits. Well, who lives near this particular refuge and other refuges? And especially in cities, it's sometimes groups that disproportionately lack access to nature. And so this is important at the Department of the Interior, for instance, for making the case for why these urban programs, which weren't historically part of DOI's portfolio, are an increasingly important part of the management we do and the outreach to the American public. We also did some work on after doing the pilot accounts, we said, well, what have we learned from this? One thing is that the US government is pretty fragmented, and so we need to develop collaborations across a whole bunch of agencies to produce these accounts. We need to develop demand for them. We can't just produce the numbers. We'd like for people to be using them in decision making, as people do data from the economic accounts. And there's a whole bunch of scientific work to advance them. And I point this out especially for this audience because this isn't just something that the government can do on its own. We are actively looking for academic and other collaborators who can help out with this process, especially the second and the third points. There's lots of cases where academics work with on the ground stakeholders and with the science to improve it as we go. So, with that, I'm going to pivot a bit and talk about the Biden administration initiative, which comes out of an executive order that President Biden issued on Earth Day of 2022. We were able to move with the support of the White House pretty rapidly to produce a national strategy on natural capital accounting, which was released in January of this past year. And what this calls for is over the next 10 to 15 years, we're going to develop a really comprehensive set of natural capital accounts. This is a Gantt chart from the middle of that national strategy document, and it shows a number of things. First, there's a whole bunch of components of these accounts we need to build, from natural hazards to air, land, and water, environmental activities, marine natural capital. And there's a whole bunch of agencies that are going to be responsible for developing them. And finally, there's a long timeline for many of these. We want to get these to what we call production grade statistical products, which are mature, accepted products that have the sort of buy in that our economic indicators have. And to do that, that's going to take a few rounds of work to improve the quality and the comprehensiveness of the accounts over time. So we go through stages of pilot and prototype accounts in the light and the medium gray before we get to a mature statistical product. And there are a number of other accounts for things like forests, urban green space, pollinators, and a whole bunch of other types of natural capital. So quite a bit that will happen here over the next 10 to 15 years. I'm going to pivot to talk a little bit about big data, and just to say that there are at least three challenges that we face here. One is that we have a policy challenge to integrate this information in decision making, which, if we're able to do that, a lot of our decisions in theory will look different because we're able to account for nature in impacts that are both beneficial and harmful, and design better choices that will lead us towards sustainability in this age of rapid global change. So we have a policy challenge. We have a science challenge, which is that ecosystem services depend a lot on geographic context. You can't just say that an acre of forest in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains has the same value as one in the Midwestern US or in the Pacific Northwest. So it depends on the ecology, it depends on the socioeconomics of the people who are benefiting as to how those ecosystems and their services provide value. And a lot of studies of ecosystem services are local. So if we think about taking them national, we have to incorporate the right level of context about the ecology and the socioeconomics. We can't just we can't oversimplify, but we also can't include the level of detail of every local study. So there's kind of a sweet spot when you scale up from a local to a national scale study. And we need a strategy for code and high performance computing in many cases. So one of the challenges here is that ideally we'd be able to have reproducible code for quite a few ecosystem services, maybe as many as 10 to 15, that we're able to recompute annually. We want to be able to do this with low latency. So there's not a long lag between when we get the input data and when we produce the outputs. And we'd like to produce these annually, just like our GDP numbers. And so that's going to require a public and reproducible code base where it's relatively easy to couple incoming data with models to get outputs, and probably using common best practices for coding, so we don't have 10 to 15 to 20 models that are all being run by different groups and in different programming languages and stuff. And we've done some work for this. I won't get into these too much today, but we've done work on urban ecosystem accounts and crop pollination, which is really exciting. So we are starting to tackle these problems. Big data, there is definitely a big role for this in natural capital accounting, and it's a really exciting time to be involved with this work. I list a few examples on this slide. We're already using examples using big data from commercial real estate transactions data in land accounts, which calculate the value of not just real estate, but of the underlying land itself in the US. So my colleagues at the Bureau of Economic Analysis are already using commercial big data from the real estate industry for that. We've used work on eBird data for recreational bird watching, which is great. We certainly have the potential in the years ahead to use things like Internet of Things data from cities to get at values for urban ecosystem accounts, sensor networks, and such. We increasingly are getting better and better data around water accounts. USGS about 2 weeks ago released a next generation water use product, which calculates and provides monthly sectoral water use using reported and modeled data with machine learning. Really exciting work. Before that, we had water use data reported literally every 5 years. So to go from every 5 years to monthly data is incredibly powerful, as you could imagine. We have colleagues working with a few other agencies. EPA and the Forest Service are working on using cell phone location data and social media data. There are some challenges around that, but some potential big data uses there. And certainly other applications of citizen science data that could be explored. So I think with all of these, we have challenges to understand and navigate trade-offs around bias and the coverage of these data sets. And we'd like to be able to intelligently combine deductive, inductive, and hybrid model approaches. So not to always say we need to use older process-based models or always machine learning models. I'd like to think that we are going to choose the best available models and sometimes be able to use hybrid approaches. So, what are some of the challenges here? One of these is reducing latency. As I mentioned, we'd like to be able to get as close to real time as we can. We have cropland data for the US, which is released every February, which is cropland from the previous summer, which is pretty amazing at 30 meters for the continental US. Incredible product that our colleagues at USDA produce. The National Land Cover Database, by contrast, used to be a 5-year product. We've gotten that down to 2 to 3 years. USGS is aiming to produce a land cover product for the nation that will be annual and released with about a year's latency. So we're getting better and better at that. And I mentioned the water use example too, which is exciting. We still have data gaps, and we need to find and fill the most important ones. We need to know when to say when the existing data are good enough. We need to move from my favorite model to the best or most appropriate model. There was an amazing paper I saw a while back that modelers don't actually choose the best model objectively by scanning the literature, looking for the model that's best suited, and applying it, making objective decisions. Much more often is we use the models we were taught, that our advisor uses, that our colleagues uses. There's a social aspect of modeling, which is natural and part of human nature. But we'd like to avoid getting entrenched in a model that's not actually the best fit and to try to choose the best models for the job. There's a big set of issues around interoperability. I'm going to speak a little bit about that. You heard in my bio that this is something that I'm very interested in, but right now we have great open science, and open science has really advanced in the last 10 years, but we still have data and models scattered across agencies and repositories. We rely on to rely on individual scientists to rerun these models in a consistent way isn't sustainable. And So how do we move that paradigm? I'll talk a little bit more about that. And we also have some big challenges with making sure that a national account is national and that we include Alaska, Hawaii, and U.S. territories, and especially Alaska, which is really big, doesn't have many people, but is experiencing rapid environmental change. And much of the data are out there, but this idea of taking your data and making it compatible with our economic accounts is new to many people, and so we need to do what I call the last mile of taking physical data and putting it into formats that will play well and work with economic data. So I'll spend a few moments talking about interoperability, and then I'll wrap this up and move to Q&A. Briefly, interoperability, there are multiple definitions of it, but one that I like is the ability of independently developed data and tools to work together with minimal effort. And the use of computational pipelines is kind of implied here, and that means that models and workflows ought to also support interoperability. I've worked together with colleagues in Spain and with the United Nations to work on a tool that will enable, especially countries in the global south, to do natural capital accounting, where there's less data and less scientific capacity. And what we've done is we've produced a tool where by going to a website, a user can log in, select an area they're interested in modeling, and select which ecosystem services they model. And areas is underlain by an AI engine, which will go out, find machine actionable data and models, combine them, run the models, and produce the results, maps, tables, and reports automatically, which is pretty exciting. The limitation behind that is it requires interoperable data and models. So if we have hundreds of scientists actively contributing data and models, we have a very powerful ecosystem of data and models. If we have a small handful of them, it's not as powerful. So one of the things that we've been doing is trying to do outreach with people about what is interoperability and why does it matter. In a nutshell, Aries uses technologies called semantics and machine reasoning, which, if you hear about AI, you probably are hearing about machine learning and certain flavors of machine learning, which are really popular. These are not all that exist. And so, semantics basically means a simple way to put it is consistent metadata labels that describe in a clear and unambiguous way what a data set or a model is referring to in a way that a computer can make choices about how to combine those data and models. Um, Reasoning is something that you and I do hundreds of times a day without thinking about it. We're thinking subconsciously whether we're hot, cold, thirsty, hungry, and we're making choices to eat, drink, put on an extra layer of clothes, take an umbrella if it's raining outside. Those are the sorts of things that we make decisions when we're faced with evidence. What machine reasoning is enabling machines to do the same thing, giving a machine a choice when it has, say, it could choose between a particular data set or set of models to satisfy a user request. How does a computer make those choices in a scientifically defensible way? So, what Aries does is it combines semantics, which actually underpin a whole range of AI approaches, with algorithms that let a computer make decisions when faced with a particular set of choices, rules about when and where to use models, semantics that cross disciplines, an ecosystem of open data and models, and open source software. And when we have that, we can have fast multidisciplinary modeling that's fair or findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, which is the sort of emerging next generation paradigm for open science. So, in order to do this, Aries starts with what we normally think of data sets as resources, but that includes models as well. We attach a consistent set of semantics to those to describe something in measurement units with descriptors, and then there's an AI-based engine that can be accessed either through a technical modeling interface or a web browser to make a request and have it fulfilled and to run a workflow and to generate results. Lastly, we produce this interoperability strategy, which the idea behind this is to lay out the vision for a future where we have more interoperable data and models, where data providers, modelers, and institutions like governments can share their data and make them publicly accessible both to people and machines so that we have this growing ecosystem of data and models that can talk to each other and work with each other, and ways to implement the strategy. So that's this is my last slide actually. I want to actually I'm happy to answer any questions, but I also have three questions for you. I know Easel is doing some really amazing things with big data. So do you know of big ecological data that we might be missing that might be able to help with natural capital accounting, and how can we build bridges there? Um, what are some ideas on how to improve interoperability for the data that you may know about? And how might other academic ecologists and data scientists work in this natural capital accounting space? I'm happy to talk more about any of these or to answer the questions you may have. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak today. And yeah, we'll open it up to questions.
Thanks, Ken. Yeah, any questions here or online? Or thoughts about these questions?
Hi, everyone.
Mhm.
So I've been having some discussions about the information density of metrics.
Mhm.
Now, at the beginning, you talked about sort of leaning heavily on the current paradigms and statistics for GDP and sort of nationalized economic ones. But could you sort of opine a little bit or just tell us a little bit about your thoughts about sort of how much information do you think we could get into a metric and that metric still be useful?
In terms of composite metrics, you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
Because presumably they eventually get so convoluted that you can't really understand what they mean anymore.
Yep. So I'll go back to this diagram here. And what I'll give a few examples. I'll start with water accounts, which I've worked in a fair bit. And for water accounting, We track a few different things. We track stocks of water. So how much water do we have in groundwater and snowpack and reservoirs, et cetera, and how is that changing over time? We track the use of water by different industries. And so we could look at, is water use stable, declining, increasing relative to water resources? We track water quality, how that's changing over time. And we track the emissions of pollutants into waterways. So those are four things we track for water accounts, each of which are pretty discrete. That's one example for all of these, what we call phase 1, 2, and 3 accounts. What we have at the top here are two things called headline summaries. And those are interesting because those are intended to be these composite indicators. And the one requirement that they place is that we can put things in a dollar value, which GDP is. GDP is the total value of goods and services bought and sold in the economy. And because it's things that are bought and sold, it misses some things. It misses nature, but it also misses things like household labor or volunteer work don't get included in that. The gift economy is not included in GDP. Well, if you buy a gift from a store and give it to someone, it is. But when I say gift economy, I mean if you make something and freely gift it to a friend and they do the same for you, that transaction isn't measured. So it's just the stuff that can be measured in dollars, but that we can aggregate. And that misses a lot of things. But what it gets at is if we could value the sum total of ecosystem services, we call that natural capital wealth. And if we can look at how that's changing over time, we can look at how is our natural capital declining or improving. Are we managing our fish stocks and our forests and our wetlands and other resources sustainably? And the second headline indicator is net domestic product inclusive of natural assets. So gross domestic product is just the sum total of economic activity, but net domestic product is actually a little more interesting because it takes out depreciation. So if we're wearing down a bunch of assets or if things get damaged in a natural disaster, we're not actually better off if we're just rebuilding things. So netting things out is important. And so what the second headline indicator will do is it will calculate net domestic product, but also include gains or losses in natural assets. So I think that's a long answer, and I'm sorry for the length, but I think that gets at your question of like, how do we combine things in a way that's still meaningful, but also have some much finer grained examples with the example of water.
Yeah, I really like that. I mean, extending that to sort of the task of data harmonization to get down to those, is the goal just to sort of make those have as many data sets in the harmonization as possible, because that refines the answer?
For these top composite measures, yes, as long as, of course, you're not double counting, or if you're measuring the same thing in multiple ways, you're finding some way to take the best estimates. But yeah.
Thanks.
I mean, to give one other quick example that might help with ecosystems, because I didn't get into the specifics, but ecosystem accounting, which is measured, which is this system here, it's designed to look at the extent of ecosystems, the physical condition of ecosystems, and their services in physical and monetary terms. So for grasslands, for instance, we could look at, are they growing or shrinking in extent? Is their ecological quality changing? Are they getting fragmented or otherwise degraded or restored? And what services do they rely on? So that's a case where, again, we got a bunch of different metrics, and it's about pulling out and telling a story rather than trying to aggregate them and lose too much information.
There's a question in the chat.
Yeah.
Do you mind reading the question for everyone and then responding?
I might need to do this. I need to stop sharing. Let's see. Yes. Biodiversity data through occurrence records. That's a great question. So biodiversity data, At the moment, because accounts are designed to be dynamic over time, so ideally we'd be tracking things like the abundance of species and how they're changing over time. The biologists in the room know how challenging that is in terms of data availability. So if we have ways of tracking change over time, we can do that for, there are things like the breeding bird survey, which can get at biodiversity over time. I think for some taxa it's going to be possible. For others, it would be difficult. We'd like to do more of it, and we need to do more of that. But the fact that it needs to change over time is challenging. It means that sometimes we need models, and when do we have enough data to credibly populate those models? That said, I'm not familiar with iDigBio, so I have to give that a look.
Going back to the questions that you had posted, we're looking for different data sets and stuff. Anyone here have ideas for data sets that could be incorporated?
Let me share my screen again, and I'll get back to those questions I had.
So you ping neon data there. Are you guys not currently incorporating neon data?
I did ping them, and we've not been able to make the connection with the Neon team. I think some of our higher level folks that are working across all these initiatives um, um, have not been able to dig into specific data sources. So that's one that I'm interested in, because it's, or LTER might be another one. How can we look at some of these ecological networks? Does anyone here work on Neon and have ideas on how this might all fit together? It was kind of a leading question because I know Neon's based in Boulder, and I thought I might have someone in the audience.
Yeah, we have a couple of relationships with Neon, and we actually have a data library that shows some of the ways that we access Neon data and how we refine those.
Oh, cool.
So they're on GitHub repositories, so I'll
Mhm.
share those with you. But we have a hackathon this week, and as one of the examples there, we put in sort of harmonizing LTER with Neon data.
Mm-hmm.
So LTER is all managed through the EDI system,
Mhm.
Environmental Data Initiative. And so they go for a really long time, but they don't have very many sites. And the Neon
Right.
has a lot of sites that don't go for a long time. So you can put the two together and get some nice measurements. But they have sort of everything you could ever want, which is really nice. Plus
Yeah,
watchtowers.
it'd be a really good exercise to try to figure out what the contact points are between Neon, LTER, and natural capital accounting. That's something that we need to find a way to make happen.
The other one that I thought about is Clinton Francis and Jesse Barber have been doing a lot of making light pollution and noise pollution maps.
Oh,
And
wow.
they've also been doing some on the ground experiments about sort of the value that people get out of nature. So they'll do some like surveys of people hiking under different scenarios, and they are doing some bioacoustic. They'll put biodiversity speakers out, and then get metrics of at a visitor center, for example. How much does volunteerism at the visitor center or donations to the visitor center go up or down as people are appreciating the nature around them a little bit more?
Nice.
So
That's great.
yeah, noise and sound, light and sound pollution, plus the sort of how do we feel about nature.
What were the names you mentioned? Clinton Barber was one of them?
Clinton Francis and Jesse Barber.
Nice.
They're Cal Poly and University of Idaho, I think.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll look them up.
Are you familiar with Ameriflex?
Yeah, loosely familiar with it. And I know, you know, there's data on carbon sequestration and storage that are going into these and other data sets. So I'm not a carbon expert myself, but I know that those do go into some measurements.
I think another possibility is a long-term agro-ecosystem network, LTAR.
Mhm.
So they have many sites and also shooting for long-term agroecological data, and they
Mhm.
are involved with stakeholders, which are farmers at large. So they're just naturally, there are like intersections between the natural, like physical properties and the human aspects.
Mhm.
So I think LTR could be a good source.
Thank you. Yeah, we do have colleagues from USDA who are involved in this, as you would expect. There's all the various government agencies. I think 27 of them at last count. And it's interesting because LTAR, there's the USDA analog. LTER, you know, there's not a single agency that's managing ecological resources. There's various DOI agencies. There's the Forest Service. There's NOAA. There's quite a few. So interesting how we build these connections. I should add this isn't specifically a question, but especially for those of you who are students out there, if this type of thing is of interest, feel free to reach out. You know, there are periodic opportunities to participate in this work, either postdocs, graduate student positions. A variety of agencies are trying to spin up greater efforts in this natural capital accounting space. So it's one that I certainly find exciting, and if this feels like it's of interest to you, you know, there may be opportunities to work on this in the years ahead.
Great. Any last questions or comments for Ken?
Sure, I have a quick question.
Mhm.
I was wondering about whether you partner with local governments at all, like cities, to get information on what they have going on, or can you really ascertain that from the available secondary data sources and land cover data and that sort of thing? And given the national focus here and sort of international focus, do you think there's still value in quantifying more at the local scale ecosystem services and natural capital?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, the urban ecosystem accounts are one way in which we've done that by connecting. And of course, it takes work to reach out and to build those relationships and cultivate them. And so that can be challenging and take time. You know, we have done that in a few places with the urban accounts. I have a colleague at the University of Hawaii who's on the faculty there who's done quite a bit of outreach to state government in Hawaii for using natural capital accounts there. So there are a lot of opportunities to sort of downscale and use the data locally because they're spatial data and they can be sort of quickly reassembled for a city, a county, a watershed, a conservation district. So I think there's lots of opportunities there to use it to work more closely with decision makers.
Great. Well, there's no other questions. Let's thank Ken again. Thanks for coming.
Thanks again, everyone.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
that was really interesting. Thanks, Ken.
Take care.